Hey everybody, it's Eric from epautos.com, your libertarian car guy. And I wanted to do a little rant on something that is going on in my particular state, but has ramifications for other states and for the country as a whole. Some of you may have followed the story. There was a shooting recently in Virginia where I live, and our vaunted Governor Coon Man Northam has proposed, of course, that guns be taken away from the people who didn't do it, per the very lucid comment of the writer William Burroughs almost 50 years ago. And not just the guns, also things like, and I put it in air quotes, high-capacity magazines and silencers and so on. Now, it's an interesting example of the cognitive dissonance that afflicts this country and manifests in so many ways. Of course, Governor Coon Man is not advocating that high-capacity magazines and high-capacity pistols and silencers and yada 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 be taken away from armed government workers or his personal security detail, but from people like me and you and everybody else listening to this, us ordinary plebes who've committed no crimes and given no reason to suspect that we might be about to commit them, but nonetheless are going to have our rights infringed and be turned into de jure criminals simply by dint of a legislative pen for possessing arbitrarily illegal equipment that was legal previously. That assumes that Governor Northam Coon Man's proposals get passed, and they may or may not, but nonetheless, it's a teaching moment to illustrate this noxious hypocrisy that the ruling class has. One standard for them, another standard for other people, and you can just tick off all sorts of examples of this. Another example that pertains to firearms is as follows. I've got a concealed carry permit, and when I got the permit, I was very carefully told that I had better think twice about ever using a firearm for any reason except in the most dire circumstances. I'm obliged by law as a civilian with a concealed carry permit to retreat in the face of danger, and legally speaking, I may only use my gun to defend myself if I can demonstrate after the fact that my life, not property, my life was in imminent danger of being extinguished. Now, consider that extremely high standard for the use or threatened use of lethal force, which with the very, very lax standard that applies to armed government workers who can put their hands on their pistols, who can pull a pistol out and point it at you, and then warble or eruct or ululate later on that they felt that their safety was threatened. Now, that's a much lower standard because it is no standard. You can feel any damn thing that you want to. If I pull a gun on somebody and say, I felt that my safety was threatened, it's a really likely thing that I'm going to be placed in manacles and taken off to the clink, which is probably the right thing, as pulling a gun on somebody is a pretty big deal. Yet armed government workers are able to do it essentially at their whim whenever they wish, and even if they use their weapon, even if they actually shoot somebody, all they have to say to get out of jail literally is, I feared for my safety. And even if it's established later on that the person that they shot was not armed and the quote-unquote resisting constituted simply some reluctance to immediately obey some barked order, or the guy tried to run away, he tried to retreat, in other words, something like that, this becomes the justification for the shooting. It's insane. I cannot fathom how any reasonable, right-minded person could apply a different standard to armed government workers than ordinary civilians are expected to abide by. At the very least, now after all, we're constantly told that armed government workers are trained. You know, these guys are supposed to be disciplined and trained, right? So that means that they should be able to behave in a more restrained manner, right, in a situation. Because after all, they've been trained, haven't they? Well, yeah, the truth is they have been trained. They've been trained in submission tactics, trained to intimidate people, trained to immediately escalate violence to obtain the submission that they demand. So it's actually quite the opposite of the standard that is applied to ordinary civilians. And it's the reason why we've got this problem with armed government workers running amok. It's precisely because they are held to such a minimal, hypocritical standard. You look up the statistics and see how many people who have concealed carry permits are ever involved in any sort of violent crime involving a gun, who ever display it, ever use it. It's essentially nil. It happens every once in a while, but it's a statistical anomaly. The overwhelming majority is in, something on the order of 98+% of people who have concealed carry permits never are charged with any sort of crime of violence involving a gun. Meanwhile, something like 1,000 people in this country are shot every year by armed government workers. It really tells you something. I think we got a big problem, and the only way this problem is going to be addressed, in my opinion, will be if some of the same standards that are applied to us ordinary people are applied to armed government workers. It seems very simple and very reasonable to me. Love to get your feedback and your thoughts on this. I've got a couple of articles up on the site, EP Autos, that get into this cognitive dissonance and this hypocrisy and the double standard that is applied to us versus agents of the state. So I encourage you to come by and have a read, and thanks for listening, and please post your comments on the site. We'd love to hear from you, and thanks again for listening, and we'll catch up with you again soon.